He shouldn't have made it. A boy, no older than 8, barefoot, bruised, and barely breathing, was strapped across the back of a golden retriever, limping through the early dawn haze of Pittsburgh. From the shadows of a condemned warehouse, they emerged like ghosts. No one knew where they had come from. No one could understand how the dog had gotten him out alive. But the boy wasn't fleeing from monsters. He was running from something far worse, people who called it salvation. What follows will break your heart and rebuild it. A story of courage, of faith, of a bond that defied everything evil tried to destroy. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe a dog's love can save a soul, hit subscribe, because the story will stay with you long after the screen goes down. The morning air in Pittsburgh was soaked with a cold that clung to both concrete and memory. It was late March, and although winter had technically surrendered, its breath still lingered in the fog draped over rusted rooftops and deserted streets. Somewhere between a forgotten train yard and the crumbling shell of what used to be a textile warehouse, a golden retriever pushed through a gap in a chain-link fence. His paws were cracked and caked with mud, nails chipped, his golden fur dulled with soot and time. But there was purpose in his step, a weary, unwavering determination. Balanced across his broad back, limp as a discarded rag doll, was a young boy. Maybe 8 years old. No one knew it yet, but his name was Miles. His feet were bare. His jeans torn and stained. His arms dangled lifelessly over the dog's sides. A faint spray traced his cheek, and a dark bruise bloomed above his temple. His breath was shallow, like wind straining through a broken flute. The dog moved slowly but never stopped, maneuvering around shattered glass and decaying wood until he reached the edge of the street. His name was Jasper. 6 years old, Jasper was a golden retriever with a honey golden coat, dulled now by dust and ash. A faded scar stretched across his left shoulder, almost hidden beneath thick fur. His eyes were amber, startlingly expressive, holding something closer to sorrow than fear. He moved with the caution of a creature that had seen too much, but still believed he could save something. The streets were nearly empty, too early for commuters, too cold for wanderers. The fate, or something like it, brought them to Rudy Morales. Rudy was a 38-year-old delivery driver for the Pittsburgh Courier Express. Average height, stocky build, wiry black hair pulled into a ponytail, and a habit of humming old jazz tunes when under stress. Life hadn't been kind to Rudy. A back injury had ended his brief career as a firefighter. Since then, he'd found solace in routine and solitude. Every morning, he passed that old warehouse on his way to the depot. Never once did he expect it to deliver a miracle wrapped in fur and bruises. He had just lit a cigarette when he saw the dog crossing the intersection with a trail slung on its back. The cigarette fell from his fingers. "Oh God," he gasped, running forward. Hey boy, easy." Jasper paused at the curb but didn't flinch. His body tensed just slightly as Rudy approached, hands open, kneeling beside them. Rudy reached for the boy's wrist. "He's alive," he whispered, voice shaking. "Barely." He dialed 911 with trembling fingers, glancing around as if expecting something to jump out of the shadows. "You're not just a good boy," he murmured to Jasper. "You're a damn guardian angel." Paramedics arrived within 5 minutes. The boy was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, still unconscious. Jasper watched every move with tired, protective eyes, refusing to leave. One of the EMTs, a tall red-headed woman named Cora Lane, knelt down and spoke softly. "He'll be okay, boy. Come on. You ride with us." Cora was practical, in her early 40s, with cinnamon-dusted freckles and a reputation for staying calm under pressure. She had once worked as a vet tech before moving into emergency medicine. The transition had left scars she didn't talk about, especially the shelter fire she could never quite forget. Seeing Jasper hesitate, something in her softened. She opened the ambulance door. Without a sound, Jasper leapt in. At Allegheny General Hospital, Miles was rushed into the ER. A quick scan revealed mild hypothermia, dehydration, and bruising consistent with prolonged physical trauma. But what stunned everyone was a small tattoo behind his right ear, shaped like a half-sun cradling an eye. It was too precise to be accidental. Too deliberate to ignore. While the doctors worked, Jasper refused to leave the boy's side. Nurses tried twice to lead him out of the ICU, but his low, steady growl, protective, not aggressive, made them think better of it. That's when Dr. Emily Green was called in. Emily was 35, with chestnut hair usually tied in a braid and eyes that flickered between steel and softness. A trauma specialist, she'd spent 4 years with Medicine Sans Frontieres before returning home to care for her aging mother. Tall and composed, she wore exhaustion like a permanent shadow under her eyes. When she entered the room and saw the dog curled beside the unconscious boy, she didn't try to move him. She knelt instead. "Hey there," she said gently. "You staying with him?" Jasper lifted his head but didn't move. Emily checked the boy's vitals, then turned her attention to the dog. Something about his collar struck her as rugged military-grade nylon, reinforced seams, and a metal tag with crucially worn numbers. She frowned, making a mental note to scan it later. Out in the hallway, Rudy was giving his statement to a tired officer. "I don't know where they came from," he said, voice hushed. "But that dog," he carried the kid like a soldier. By nightfall, Miles had stabilized, but still hadn't spoken. Jasper remained by his side, motionless. His tail twitched only when the boy stirred. Emily re-entered the room with a bowl of water and a clean blanket, placing them gently beside Jasper. "You're a good dog," she whispered. "Whatever you went through, you didn't leave him behind." Outside the hospital window, the fog was beginning to lift. But inside that quiet room, where a golden retriever stood bored over a broken boy, something heavier than fog remained. Something that felt like the beginning of something deeper. Rain had started just after dawn, tapping gently against the emergency room windows at Allegheny General. Outside, the world was painted in muted grays and silvers, the Pittsburgh skyline a silhouette lost behind layers of mist. But inside room 214, the only color that moved was the golden fur of Jasper, curled at the foot of the hospital bed, and the pale, fragile hand of the boy resting lightly against him. Miles hadn't spoken. Not one word. Not since arriving the day before. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting for lines, changing bedding. But none could draw even a flicker of recognition from the boy, except when Jasper moved. Then Miles's hand would twitch or his eyelids would flutter like his dreams were tethered to the dog beside him. Dr. Emily Green returned just after 8 a.m., her hoodie damp from the morning drizzle, a to-go coffee steaming in her hand. She paused at the doorway, watching the boy and the dog. There was a stillness between them, like the space between thunder and lightning. A pause that wasn't empty but charged with something unspoken. Emily had seen trauma before, plenty of it. But this felt different. She stepped inside quietly and knelt beside Jasper, speaking in a whisper. "You know him, don't you? Or maybe he knows you." Gently, she unclipped Jasper's collar, holding it up to the light. The nylon band was military-grade, the stitching deliberate, reinforced along the edges. Tucked beneath the main plate, almost hidden, was a small chip no larger than a grain of rice. The metal tag bore a symbol, a six-pointed star inside a ring of segmented triangles. Faint, nearly worn away. But Emily froze. She had seen that emblem before. Not in a textbook. Not in hospital records. But once years ago, in a weathered folder her father had kept locked in an old file cabinet in their basement. Colonel Matthew Green had worked in experimental K-9 deployment programs before disappearing in 2009 on a classified mission. Officially, he'd been declared MIA. Emily's mother had died believing he'd simply abandoned them. And Emily? She had stopped asking questions. Until now. Holding Jasper's collar in her hands, everything came rushing back. Her father's voice, the strange diagrams, the stories he'd never finished. Jasper tilted his head as if sensing the sudden shift in her breathing. She exhaled slowly and returned the collar to its place. Across the hallway, the hospital's administrative desk buzzed with new admissions. A new face sat among them, Leah Porter, intake coordinator for Pine Hill Children's Shelter. Leah was in her early 50s, short, sturdy, with cropped gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Her thick-rimmed glasses sat low on her nose and her cardigan was speckled with pet hair. She was known for two things, never sugarcoating anything and never giving up on a child. Leah had once worked in juvenile court services, but had resigned after exposing a foster care cover-up no one wanted to acknowledge. That choice had cost her career momentum, but earned her the trust of dozens of children who needed someone unshakably loyal. She'd been called in after hospital staff ran the boy's face through every known missing persons database. No results. No last name. No identifying documents. No matches in facial recognition. For all practical purposes, Miles didn't exist. Emily met Leah at the nurse's station. "He's stable," Emily began. "But he hasn't spoken. Doesn't respond. Won't eat. But he responds to the dog. That's the only thing we've seen." Leah sighed. "Then the dog stays," she said simply. And he did. Later that day, Miles was transferred to Pine Hill Children's Shelter. Leah personally placed him in a small room near her office, a converted library with 2 beds and a mural of 3 branches painted across the ceiling. Jasper lay down beside him the moment they arrived without needing a word. Over the following hours, staff made gentle attempts to engage the boy. Tasha Benning, a 27-year-old counselor with dreadlocks pulled into a bun and a voice soft as a hen, sat by his bedside with crackers and a coloring book. No response. But he watched her barely, but he did. And when she placed a crayon in his hand, he held it loosely. But he didn't let go. That night, the wind picked up. It rattled the window panes of the old shelter like a warning. Inside room 3B, the boy finally moved. He shifted from the bed and crawled down beside Jasper on the floor, pressing his forehead into the dog's shoulder. No words, but no more silence even. Jasper thumped his tail once, a steady heartbeat in the dark. The next morning brought sunlight, pale and shy, through the shelter's east-facing windows. Miles sat in the courtyard under a massive oak tree, legs crossed, Jasper beside him. Tasha watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a slow smile rising to her face. She'd seen him reach for a dandelion that morning. Just for a moment. But it had been enough. Inside, Emily had returned with something important. She walked into the shelter's small tech room where an old friend was waiting, Liam Patel, cybersecurity consultant, sarcastic genius, and Emily's ex from their college days. Dr. Green, he greeted with a monk salute, breaker of encryption and hearts. You bring me a puzzle? She smirked and handed him Jasper's column. There's a chip embedded. Can you pull anything off it? Liam's eyebrows lifted. Oh, you know I love a mystery dog column. Let's see what we've got. He turned the column over carefully, working with precision. Within minutes, data began to stream across the screen. Military-grade webbing. Custom identifying. Embedded label SE7X, Sunlight Echo Field logs. Inside the chip were encrypted video files, handler notes, biometric scans, far more than either of them expected. One folder stood out, asset number 211, Jasper handling, CPTM, Ellison. Emily leaned in. So Jasper was part of this program. He wasn't just trained, he was deployed. Liam opened one of the logs. A brainy reporting played, a training compound in the woods. A woman kneeling beside a golden retriever pup, wrapping his paw in gauze. Her voice was soft, but clear. You're not just a dog. You protection. You purpose. Emily stared at the screen, her heart racing. Children of the new light, her father had once muttered during a rare, broken conversation. Not every operation ends in a report. Some end in fire. Back at Pine Hill, Miles sat with a sketchbook resting on his lap, Jasper by his side, ears alert, tail flicking like a metronome. Emily sat a short distance away, just watching. She didn't speak, didn't interrupt. Miles's hand moved across the page in swift, sure strokes. After weeks of silence, this was the clearest signal of healing she'd seen yet. Tasha had given him the sketchbook that morning, whispering that sometimes crayons could say what words couldn't. The page was half filled now. Swirling lines. Dark shapes. A rough sketch of a sun, split in half. Beneath it, something that looked like an eye. Emily's breath caught in her chest. That same symbol, the one behind Miles's ear. The one on Jasper's column. It wasn't a coincidence. Miles, she said softly, approaching without startling him. Can I show you something? He paused, but didn't look up. She held out Jasper's collar and pointed to the faint six-pointed star. Do you recognize this? For the first time, Miles looked up. His eyes were wide, not frightened, but clear. And then he nodded. Jasper sat up straighter, as if affirming the silent exchange. Emily didn't press further. She didn't have to. Later that afternoon, she returned to Liam with more questions than answers. I need to know where Jasper's been. If there's GPS data in that chip, track it. Liam nodded, already several steps ahead. There's a task trace, he said, scrolling through coordinates. One secondary location keeps pinging, Lighthouse Sanctuary. Laurel Mountains. Off-grid. No listed owner. But the coordinates are real. Emily leaned in, eyes narrowing. Why would a dog have location data for a place that doesn't officially exist? Liam looked up, jaw tightening. Because someone took him then. Back at the shelter, Miles sat beneath the oak tree again, Jasper beside him, as always. The pages of his sketchbook were filling rapidly now, images of trees, tunnels, narrow hallways, strange people with blurred faces, and that symbol. Emily sat beside him. Hey Miles, she said gently. I found something today. Something important. I think you know where it leads. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he stood. He pointed to a drawing of the symbol, then to the road beyond the shelter gate. He was ready. They walked in silence for almost 20 minutes, weaving through an older part of the city where rusted rail lines crisscrossed weed-choked lowiths and crumbling walls roared graffiti like old scars. Jasper led with unshakable certainty, his nose low, tail stiff like a compass needle. They arrived at a forgotten bridge, one Emily had passed 100 times but never noticed. Miles stopped and pointed again. There, he whispered. The concrete slab at the edge of the bridge was cracked, but beneath it was something hidden. Jasper scratched at the ground. Rudy, who had joined them quietly, knelt and ran his fingers along the mossy edge. There used to be a bolt right here, yeah. He pressed against the slab. Still faint. Hold on. He pulled out a flashlight and shone it into a narrow gap. A faint latch glinted beneath years of dirt and rust. Rudy and Emily exchanged a look. Jasper didn't hesitate. He stood at the entrance, tail low, eyes sharp. With a groan of rusted hinges, the hidden door opened. Cold air spilled out, a mix of mildew, copper, and something else. Something forgotten. Beneath the bridge was a narrow stairwell, descending into shadow. Jasper went first. His paws moved silently on the concrete, nose twitching, ears taut. Behind him, Miles clutched Emily's hand tightly. His fingers were small, clammy, but resolute. They waited until dusk to return with backup. Emily, Rudy, Jasper, Miles, and Leah, who had been hesitant at first but knew there were some things more important than protocol. They descended the staircase together, flashlights sweeping across rusted lockers and walls stained with age. In one corner, behind a sheet of hanging tarp, they found her. A girl. Then, maybe 10 years old. Long tangled hair, gray as ash. Her arms were covered in fading bruises. Around her neck hung a leather cord with a pendant. A metal tag etched with the letter N. Jasper stepped forward slowly. The girl blinked, startled. Her voice cracked. Barely more than breath. Miles. Emily dropped to her knees. You're Maya, she said softly. The girl nodded. Where is he? He's safe, Emily replied. He sent us. Maya tried to stand, but her legs buckled. Emily caught her before she fell. Behind them, Rudy stepped into position, shielding their exit with one hand gripping a crowbar. But someone else was there. A figure emerged from the dark. A silhouette more shadow than man. He didn't speak at first, just watched. Then, his voice echoed low and strange. This won't stop what's coming, he said. The light is already rising. Jasper growled. Not a warning, but a promise. Emily led Maya back toward the stairwell. Paul Benton, the local sheriff, waited at the top. He'd arrived minutes earlier after Leah made a panicked call. Tall, quiet, in his 40s, Paul was the kind of man who moved slowly because he never had to run. He raised his sidearm, stepping in front of the group. Tell it to the judge, he said to the shadowed figure. The group disappeared into the trees, retreating under a moonless sky. The next day was peaceful. Maya sat on the back porch of the shelter's main cabin, legs swinging, fingers smudged with blue and green chalk. Her hair had been trimmed into a neat bob. A soft hoodie replaced the threadbare clothes she'd worn in the bunker. Her cheeks had color again. Miles sat beside her, humming to himself as he colored in the sky on their shared masterpiece. A large canvas pinned to a wooden board. It showed two children holding hands, a golden retriever between them, standing before a sun split in two. Jasper sat beside the painting, tail wagging gently. The shelter had changed. They weren't just surviving now, they were building. Emily stood in the doorway with Rudy and Paul, watching the children, her arms crossed tightly. We're going to need something bigger, Rudy said, smiling. We've got 2 more applications this morning. One's a veteran with a trained service shepherd. Wants to volunteer. Emily nodded. We're building something real here. The Echo program had been reborn, this time with purpose and with transparency. The name was chosen deliberately, not just because of what it stood for, but because of who it remembered. Jasper. The story might have ended there, hope restored, children safe, a shelter healing. But there were still echoes left in the walls of the past. Inside the shelter's records room, Emily pulled open an old drawer. It groaned on its rails, heavy with manila folders and ruined corners. Leah stood beside her, holding a list of known aliases tied to abandoned facilities, some linked to former private schools, others to shell non-profits dissolved without a trace. Emily flipped through dozens of documents. Names crossed out, intake numbers, photos of children, renamed and relocated. One file caught her breath. A single sheet of paper with the name Miles E. handwritten across the top. She froze. At the bottom, A partial photo of a young boy with dark hair, a blurred smile, and one familiar phrase scribbled beside the guardian's name. Ellison, and Rudy leaned over Emily's shoulder. "That's his mother," he said quietly. "She ran the program," Emily added, voice flat. "She tried to stop them." Jasper, lying beside them, gave a low whine. Then he stood, walked over, and pressed his nose to the photo. And then he growled. Not at the picture, but at the far corner of the room. They turned. A figure stood in the shadow, barely more than a silhouette, partially obscured in the dim light. "Hello again," came the voice. It was Crane, Pastor Crane. He had been watching from the edges since the day Emily brought Miles to the hospital. Soft-spoken, helpful, always just around the periphery, but now his smile didn't reach his eyes. "You must be Dr. Green," he said with a nod. "I've heard of you." Emily's jaw tightened. "Funny, I hadn't heard of you until things started going wrong." Crane chuckled softly. "That's usually when people start listening." Before she could respond, the door opened again. Paul Benton, the sheriff, stepped into the room, summoned by Leah's urgent message. Tall, rugged, with a permanent furrow in his brow. Paul had served overseas before returning to Pittsburgh to raise his niece. He rarely spoke more than he had to, but when he did, people listened. "You're trespassing," he told Crane plainly. Crane didn't flinch. "I'm offering salvation." Emily stepped between them. "We've heard what you're offering," she said, voice low. "And we've seen what it cost these kids." Crane's smile remained tight, rehearsed. "The light is already rising," he said. "You can't stop it." Back in the tech room, Leon had been working on Jasper's collar again. He retrieved the encrypted GPS trace from the chip, studying patterns and timestamps. One final ping stood out, remote, isolated. A place labeled Lighthouse Sanctuary, Laurel Mountains. No listed owner. No phone lines. No official road access. Emily stared at the screen. Why would a dog have location data for a place that doesn't exist on any map? Leon looked up. Because someone took him there. And someone wanted him to come back. That night, they made a decision. They had to find the truth. Emily, Rudy, Cole, and Jasper packed up just before dusk. Miles stayed behind at the shelter with Leah and Maya, safe room watched. Emily kissed his forehead gently. "We'll come back," she promised. Miles looked into her eyes and whispered, "Find the others." The road into the Laurel Mountains twisted like a serpent through the trees. Fog thickened with every mile, swallowing their headlights. Paul drove his unmarked SUV with steady hands, eyes sharp. In the back seat, Rudy sat silent, gripping a crowbar wrapped in an old dish towel. Jasper stood beside him, ears erect, unmoving. They parked 50 yards from the last GPS point and moved on foot. The trees crowded in, branches falling at their coats. Jasper led the way, fluid as smoke. The golden retriever moved low to the ground. His amber eyes looked ahead. He stopped at a moss-covered stone slab. Jasper pawed at the earth until a rusted grate revealed itself, nearly hidden beneath fallen pine needles. Rudy knelt and wiped brine from the frame. "This used to be a fire exit," he murmured. "For emergencies." Paul pried it open. The air below was stale, dry, but sharp with the scent of mildew, iron, and abandonment. They descended slowly. The underground corridor was narrow, lined with crumbling brick and flickering lights long disconnected from any power source. Still, something about the air felt charged. Jasper moved forward without hesitation. Around the final corner, they found another door. This one not hidden but locked. Emily stepped forward, glancing back once at Jasper. The dog gave a low bark, as if giving permission. Paul kicked it open. Inside was a single room, bare walls, the cot, and a burrow. Thin, gray-skinned, tangled hair clung to her face. Her arms bore fading bruises. Around her neck, a leather cord. A small metal tag with the letter N swung gently against her collarbone. She looked up, blinking in the flashlight beams. "Miles?" she whispered. Emily dropped to her knees. "You're Maya," she said gently. The girl nodded once. Her voice was hoarse. Where is he? He's safe, Emily said. He sent us. Maya stood barely. Her knees trembled. Emily caught her just in time. Behind them, footsteps. Crane again. You won't stop what's coming, he said calmly. This is prophecy. Paul raised his weapon, moving to shield the exit. Tell it to the judge, he muttered. Jasper barked. A deep, protective sound that echoed down the corridor like a warning shot. They fled the bunker. Footsteps muffled by the forest floor. Maya in Emily's arms. Rudy behind with the crowbar. Paul moving like a shield. Jasper circled them, scanning shadows, breath measured. They made it to the SUV. They didn't stop driving until dawn. The sun was soft that morning, filtered through clouds like heaven peeking in. At Pine Hill Shelter, Maya sat on the porch beside Miles, their canvas between them. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Jasper lay at their feet, tail wagging gently, eyes steady, like a sentinel who had finally completed his mission. Emily watched from a distance. They had saved them, but more than that, they'd uncovered the truth. Inside the shelter, Rudy pinned a photo of Jasper to the new bulletin board. Above it, words printed in bold black letters. Project Echo, restoring what was lost. Below it were sign-up sheets, applications from veterans, first responders, and counselors, each one hoping to join the next phase. This is only the beginning, Rudy said softly. Emily nodded. Yes, she whispered. But this time we're building it right. Spring settled gently over Pittsburgh, like a long-held breath finally released. At Pine Hill Shelter, the trees bloomed with soft whites and yellows. The scent of wildflowers clung to open windows, and laughter, quiet, tentative, but real, began to fill the once silent halls. Maya and Miles sat together most mornings on the porch of the main cabin. Their fingers were always stained with chalk or pencil, and the canvas between them grew more vivid each day. They had drawn a bridge, a dog with golden fur, a sun split in two, now rejoined into one. Jasper never strayed far from their side. His tail beat a steady rhythm whenever Miles approached. And if Maya stirred in the middle of the night, caught in a dream she couldn't escape, it was Jasper who would nose her gently back to town. Inside, the shelter had changed. What had once been a haven of last resort was now something new. A beginning. Leah called it Phase 2. Emily called it Echo. They had repurposed the old storage room into a planning hub. Whiteboards, maps, printed reports, everything collected from the old programs tied to Jasper and Project Sunlight. With Rudy and Cole's help, they created a digital archive, logging each child rescued, each facility shut down, each new lead followed. But it was Jasper who brought the heart to it all. He wasn't just a dog. He was the first thread in a tapestry of redemption. Emily reached out to her father's old military contacts, quietly, cautiously. Files once classified were now cracked open. The deeper they dug, the more they found. Project SE7X. Children of the New Light. Field deployment logs that had no right to exist. They weren't just rescuing abandoned children. They were unspooling a web spun by people who had forgotten what it meant to protect. One morning, Liam, tech expert and the unofficial heartbeat of the digital side of Echo, entered the office carrying a hard drive and an espresso. 2 more applicants today, he said, sliding a folder toward Emily. One's a vet with PTSD, already bonded with a retired K9, wants to help train therapy dogs. Emily smiled. We're not just healing the kids anymore, she said. We're healing the people who were supposed to protect them. In the courtyard, Miles and Maya planted their first flowers. Tasha helped them choose the soil. Leah made them promise to water them every morning. They chose marigolds and sunflowers. It's like sunlight in the dirt, Maya said. Miles just nodded, but his eyes sparkled. That night, Jasper rested at the foot of Miles's bed, ears twitching softly with every sound in the night. The boy reached down, fingers brushing the fur he'd come to trust more than anything in the world. Thank you, he whispered, and in that moment, even the silence seemed to exhale. Weeks passed, then months. Pine Hill became a model, whispers of their work spreading to shelters, clinics, and community groups across the state. Donations came. Volunteers arrived. New children found safe harbor beneath their roof. But one thing never changed. Jasper remained the symbol of the program. He attended every intake. He sat beside every new arrival. And somehow he always knew which child needed him most. One day, a reporter visited, sent by a local paper to write a piece on the shelter that saved them. The journalist watched Miles sketch in the courtyard while Jasper rested nearby. She took notes quietly until Emily sat beside her and said, "He's the reason we're here. All of us." The woman looked puzzled. "The boy?" Emily smiled faintly. "No. The dog." The article that followed was titled, "Golden Guardian, the dog who carried a boy out of the dark." It went viral. Soon, letters poured in. From other children. From families. From veterans. From people who had been broken and rebuilt. Some just said thank you. Others asked how they could help. The final trace came on a summer evening. Jasper, now almost 7, rested more often than before. His gait was slower. His eyes tired sooner. But his spirit? Unshaken. Leon had stayed late, scanning through the last fragments of encrypted data from Jasper's chip. One file stood out. A folder marked simply, Maya 211 Final. Inside was a short video. It showed a woman, dark hair, uniform, kneeling beside a golden retriever puppy. "You're not just a dog," she said, gently wrapping the pup's pulling paws. "Your protection. Your purpose. One day you're going to save someone's life." Rudy, Emily, Leah, and Cole gathered around the screen. "That's Maya's mom," Rudy said quietly. Emily nodded. She wasn't just a handler. She was the whistleblower. She tried to bring it all down, and when they wouldn't listen, she gave Jasper the only mission that mattered. "To find her kids," Leah added softly. They all turned to look at the window where Miles and Maya now played under a blanket of stars, Chuck painting a wooden board propped against the porch. In the center of the mural, 2 children. A golden dog. And a sun shining fully above them. Months later, the ECHO program expanded into 3 states. Veterans became handlers. Counselors became trainers. Abandoned dogs were paired with children who had stopped trusting anything human. And every time they opened a new center, they told the story of Jasper. Not just because he was the beginning, but because he was the heart. Jasper passed peacefully one morning just as the sun rose over the shelter's lawn. Miles and Maya were there, arms around his thick neck, tears falling freely but without fear. "He finished his mission," Maya whispered. Emily buried him beneath the oak tree beside the burden the children had planted. A plaque stood above his resting place. Jasper. Guardian. Messenger. Friend. He carried light through the dark. And just below that, the story isn't just about rescue, it's about redemption. About a love that defies cruelty. And a light that finds its way through even the darkest basement.